Often when you're working with text fields in Flash, you want to use text from an external text file or an external XML file. In this movie, we'll look at loading text in from an external file and putting that text in a text field on the stage. On the stage here, I have a text field that's a dynamic text field and has an instance name of my_txt. In the same folder as this FLA file, I have a plain text file called external.txt. We'll load that text into this text field. Let's select the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open up the Actions panel. And there are a few steps that you need to know when loading an external file. So we're going to create some variables here. So let's create a variable called req. Data type it to URL request. URL is in all caps and request is a capital R. The URL request class represents the URL of a file. So whenever you're going to work with an external file in ActionScript 3.0, you're going to use a URL request to represent that file. So I'm going to set this equal to a new URL request, and I'm going to type some parentheses, and into the constructor, I'm going to pass in the string path to the file. My file is called external.txt. Now if you don't have the exercise files, just create a plain text file in a text editor, save it as external.txt in the same folder as your FLA file. So our req variable represents external.txt as a file. Let's go down to the next line, and now we need to create an instance of the class that loads external text data. That class is called the URL loader class. So I'm creating a variable called loader. I'm going to data type it to URL loader. We'll set it equal to a new instance of the URL loader class. I'm going to go down a few lines, and the next thing to do is add the event listener to the loader to listen for when the file is finished loading. That event is called event.complete. So we'll type loader.addEventListener, same process that we used for listening for a mouse event. And the event type is going to be event. That's the event class that handles general events like when a file finishes loading and so on. .complete in all caps. For more information about the events in the event class, you can highlight event and then press F1 on your keyboard to open Flash Help. After the event type, I'm going to type a comma and a space, and then I'm going to define the function that's going to run when the file is done loading. I'll call this text loaded. Close out the parentheses, add a semicolon, and then we'll define the text loaded function in just a minute. Go down to the next line, and then have the loader load the external file. Note that I'm adding the event listener on the line before loading the file. This is an important tip here. You always want to add the event listener to listen for the complete event before you load the file. So this sequence is very important. Sometimes if you try to load the file first, the data will be loaded before the event listener is added, causing your code not to work properly. So always add the event listener first. Type loader.load, and in the parentheses we need to pass in a URL request to the file that's going to load. That's going to be req. Now I'm going to define the text loaded function. Remember, that's what's going to run when the file is done loading. So I'm going to define that in between my variable section and then my code that runs immediately here. So here I'm going to create a function. So type function, then a space, and the name, which is going to be text loaded. Remember that it needs to receive an event object. So I'm going to call that event all lowercase. And the data type is going to be event with an uppercase E. That refers to the event class that we used when telling Flash which event we're listening for. The return data type is going to be void. Type some curly braces, and there you have it. First thing I'm going to do is use a trace statement. Type trace and some parentheses and a semicolon. You can access the loaded data through the URL loader's data property. So I'm going to type loader.data inside the trace statement. This is going to return a string of data that is contained inside of the external text file that we're loading. So test the movie, and you should see the text file's information in the output window. So mine says here's some text from an external file. Nice. If you don't see anything in the output window, make sure that external.txt contains some text. So if we wanted to use that data, all we have to do is put the data in a text field. So if I delete this trace statement, and then I type my_txt.text, so we're using its text property, we set it equal to a string, and conveniently loader.data is a string, and that's going to display the external data in the text field on the stage. So test the movie, and there's the text from an external file. So to load an external file, you need a URL request to the file. You need an instance of the URL loader class. This is for loading all text files. You need to add an event listener to listen for the event.complete event, which executes when the file is done loading. Load the file, make sure the loading happens after the event listener is added. Then when you handle the complete event, you can access the data of the URL loader through its data property.